All right, so I want to answer the questions that you sent about Title IX. Only three or four of you sent questions. So those that did not send questions and you're wondering what I'm talking about, make sure that you're watching all the videos, because in some of the videos I'm asking you to do certain things. It's helping me understand if you're getting to the videos, if you're watching them. But also it's helping me create a little bit more of a dialogue in terms of what questions you have after looking at the material, reading the material, looking at the slideshows, listening to the videos. And Title IX, the Title IX talk always produces lots of questions, and so I wanted to give you guys a chance to submit questions via email that you had on Title IX. So we're going to answer the few questions that were sent in by your classmates. If some of you do have some questions you have about Title IX from the material, from what you've heard about Title IX, your own curiosities about Title IX, go ahead and email me a question, and if I get enough of those, I'll do another quick video. If I don't, then I'll just answer your questions straight away via email. So I have about 8 questions here, I think. So I guess 4 of you sent in questions. The first question was, how many people did it take to author Title IX, since Patsy Mink helped to author Title IX? And the reality of it is that Patsy Mink was the primary author. She is known as the author of Title IX. She's the representative from Hawaii, was the representative from Hawaii. But Edith Green, the representative from Oregon, did also help author it. So I guess you could say technically 2 people, primarily. And of course there's, other legislators and researchers and interns that helped look into the information, data statistics for them in terms of once they wrote the law, the information to back up the need for the law. And then the second question from this student was, how long did it take for Title IX to become law? It essentially took 1 year. Once it was authored, then it was the Senator Birch Bayh from Indiana who was the one that proposed the legislation. He proposed it in 1971 to Congress. It passed the Senate in March of 1972, and then it was passed in the House in May of 1972. It was signed into law, as you have learned, by President Nixon on June 23rd, 1972. So we just celebrated, literally this past week, we just celebrated the 46th anniversary of Title IX. So it basically took 1 year for it to become law. Like I said, it was first introduced by Senator Birch Bayh in 1971 to Congress, passed by the Senate, passed by the House in May of 72. March of 72 by Senate, the House in May of 72, and then signed by President Richard Nixon about a month later at the end of June 23rd, 1972. The next 2 sets of questions. What is the best way for Title IX to be amended so it actually enforces its policies to the public? And then there was just an additional statement that says there are so many universities that aren't compliant and they still get their funding and federal support. And then 2, I don't believe that the government would start shutting down programs if they started to enforce their compliance tests with discipline. So what would enforcement look like? So this is a lot of just personal opinion on my part, obviously. I think that people have been trying to figure out how to make sure that the law is enforced just based on how the law is written, which is don't discriminate, right? Don't take away opportunities, don't omit opportunities, don't discriminate against anyone based on their sex, for any educational access. And that's pretty understandable that you shouldn't, based on someone's sex, say that you can't do X, Y, or Z, you can't have access to something. So I don't know how you amend Title IX. I'm not sure how you actually amend it so that it does enforce its policies to the public. I think you need more investigators. You need more people looking at complaints about Title IX at their institutions of education, so that things aren't in such a quagmire when people do make complaints, and it takes so long for people to look at. I think those are how you actually help enforce policies. And I actually don't think shutting down programs, I just think removing federal funding is the way that you get schools to actually pay attention, because, money talks. So you think about sort of the leader level institutions that, you take away their scholarship opportunities, that's certainly going to hurt them quite a bit if they're Division I programs that don't use a lot of scholarship or don't give out scholarships at all, then just the general funding to the institution so that it takes away from other Title IX areas that Title IX covers, like research grants, employment opportunities for people at their institution. I think any way that you can say we'll remove funding for a year until you start to show some progress, that would be the way that you could actually get, I think, institutions to pay attention, especially now in this economic climate, because everyone knows that most institutions are fiscally strapped, and it would be definitely a way to send a clear message that you're serious about it. Unfortunately, this current administration has weakened Title IX and its purview, and so I don't see this administration currently thinking that would be a route to go. But you never know. I mean, I think that would be a good way to sort of get institutions to pay attention and say we really have to fix some of the problems that we have concerning Title IX. And that's outside of athletics. That's including all the 10 areas that we know Title IX can cover. Okay, so the next two. In high school, I had a friend tell me he couldn't get a soccer scholarship because of Title IX. How is that the case? Or did he not completely understand Title IX and maybe that was something someone else had told him? What the likely possibility is that maybe one or two of the institutions that this particular student athlete was looking at chose to dole out their scholarships a particular way where they didn't have scholarships to give to male soccer players. Or maybe they only had X amount of dollars for the men's soccer team, and this particular coach chose to not give that prospect a scholarship. And maybe that happened to him in more than one instance, but I don't know, not knowing the specifics of how many schools your friend was talking about, or if he was just referencing one school in particular, or if he was told that by an institution and that was trying to dissuade that athlete to look at other schools, by implying that was the case at every institution. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that you have to be able to dole out scholarship money for your male and female athletes at a proportionate percentage. And so what that usually means is that administrators have to make decisions about what programs are going to get scholarship dollars. And I'm sure, as most of you can probably assume, and it is truly usually the case, the schools that have football get a lot of scholarship dollars. And so when they get a lot of scholarship dollars, of course, that means you have X amount of male athletes that are getting those scholarship dollars. You have to figure out how to offset that with female sports. And so what happens is other male sports tend to get hurt by not receiving many scholarship dollars so that they can offer it to other multiple female sports. So a common thing that you'll see are institutions where men and women's swimming program, the women's program has scholarships and the men do not. Now, do you have to do it that way? No. Administrators can make the decision to essentially proportionally give every program some scholarship money and allow the coach to make decisions how they're going to use that money accordingly. But of course, as you probably could imagine, when you do that, if you're looking at institutions that do put a lot of money towards certain sports, aka football, men's basketball, women's basketball, then you're not able to compete at the same level to offer the same amount of full ride scholarships or half scholarships as those other institutions do. So, administrators make decisions to put money where they want to see the best potential for competitiveness. And so what has happened is typically you'll see football, men's basketball, women's basketball, sometimes women's volleyballs, and sometimes softball are those programs that get a lot of attention with scholarship dollars. And it's also why you may have 5 full scholarships in one sport on the men's side and 5 full scholarships on the women's side, and then just a bunch of partial scholarships for all the other sports. That might happen too. So, again, not knowing his specific situation, if he told you that was just across the board, there could have been someone who said that to him, like a recruiter that was like, oh, I don't want this person to go seek out a place where he could get a scholarship, or if there was that one institution he was looking at and really wanted to go to, and the coach told him, well, because of Title IX, we don't get any scholarship dollars. A lot of people blame Title IX for things when it's not Title IX. It's the administrators who choose how to execute compliance to Title IX. And so it's just like cutting programs. You know, a lot of men's programs were cut in the wake of Title IX, but you didn't really have to do that. But they did that in order to save their primary, what they felt like their top tier programs, aka football, basketball, on the men's side, and not have to, because they wanted to add or needed to add women's programs. So instead of trimming budgets or realigning budgets accordingly, they just got rid of some men's programs, and then either created women's programs or put more money into women's programs or recruited more for women's programs, whatever it was. So I think probably that person was misled. Whoever was told them that was using Title IX as a reason, but it's not really legitimate. And then the second one that the student asked was, did Wittenberg add women's water polo because of the three-pronged test in Title IX, or was it just an interest Wittenberg had? It's a really great question, because it means that you're thinking about the application of the three-pronged test, how it might apply to our institution, and you're understanding that that is a direct result of thinking about being in compliance with Title IX. So it's a really good question, and it's good awareness of the fact that we did just add a women's program. And the answer is, it absolutely, yes, has to do with being in compliance with Title IX according to the three-pronged test, because Wittenberg did not check any one of those three-pronged tests prior to adding women's water polo. Our proportionality was way off. Our proportion of women's athletes to men's athletes is way under the proportion of female student to male student. We hadn't added a women's sport in over a decade, which women's golf was the last sport that we had added. And we couldn't prove that we were meeting all of the interests and needs of the female students. We didn't have the ability to do that, or we didn't do sort of the work that we needed to do to prove that. So we're trying to work towards number 2, which is adding opportunities for women, which is why we added water polo. Then the last 2 questions are, the first one asks, after Title IX was passed, were there any or a lot of universities that still discriminated against women that resulted in a lawsuit? That's a great question, and absolutely yes. The answer is there was. And it's one of the reasons why the gender equity study and from the NCAA and the EADA report, the Equities in Athletics Disclosure Act, those were passed because it helped universities sort of have little checklists and check-in points to make sure that they were building towards compliance. Because in the first few years after Title IX, there were many institutions that were like, well, who's going to pay attention? Nobody's going to come and check our institution out, our little school. Why would anybody care? Nobody else is worrying about compliance. And the fact of the matter is that the federal government was concerned about compliance, and so they passed the EADA, and then the NCAA said, we really need to help our member institutions understand what it means to be in compliance. And so, I think that is definitely what that was in response to the fact that there were schools that weren't. And so there were schools that were seeing lawsuits happen. Probably the most important and most well-known Title IX lawsuit that happened to a pretty high prestigious school institution in regard to Title IX was Cohen versus Brown. Brown, an Ivy League school. Amy Cohen was the plaintiff, and she sued Brown University for eliminating women's volleyball and women's gymnastics. At the time, the institution decided to eliminate women's volleyball, women's gymnastics, men's water polo, and men's golf. And they did it, they said, to be in compliance with Title IX. What it was for, and what they said was for budgetary reasons. The fact of the matter is that was not at all a way to institute compliance with Title IX. Amy Cohen sued the university for actually doing the opposite, which was taking away opportunity, because again, remember, Title IX is about creating opportunity, not eliminating opportunity, and taking away more women's programs when they didn't fulfill any of the 3-pronged tests, because Brown was way under proportionality. They hadn't added any women's programs, and they did nothing to prove that they were meeting women's interests. As a matter of fact, they were taking away 2 programs that were doing well, women's volleyball and women's gymnastics. But they wanted the budget dollars from those sports to funnel towards other sports, and so that's the reason that they decided to eliminate those sports. And the fact of the matter is that Cohen won the case. At the district level, she got an injunction, and so Brown had to stop the process of eliminating those sports as varsity sports, women's volleyball and women's gymnastics. Brown appealed, and at the First Circuit level, the injunction was upheld, and so they had to continue to reinstate those programs that they were going to eliminate altogether from varsity intercollegiate at a level of sport. And then it went back to district court, where Brown was seen guilty, and Amy Cohen won her case, and Brown had to fully reinstate women's volleyball and gymnastics at the university. So that's probably the most well-known lawsuit. That happened in the early 90s. I think it was 90, maybe it was 96, 90, I think it was somewhere, I should look that up, but it was 93, 94, maybe as late as 96. But it was, relatively recent. It was a couple of decades after Title IX had passed. And Brown, in their appeal to the court, said the reason that they eliminated those sports was because men were more interested in sports. That was their legitimate argument that they felt was satisfactory, and the fact of the matter is that it wasn't. And that's not a good enough reason, because it's not true. It's simply not true. All this data and statistics show that is not the case. Men are not more interested in sports. Women just haven't had the access to sport and the opportunity to play sport like men have. And then the second question by the student: how do you think we can get 50% of high school athletes to be females? Maybe add girls football and girls wrestling to list of sports available for females to play? Yes. The fact of the matter is we have to create more opportunity. Lacrosse is really growing across the United States. It's very popular, becoming very popular on the girls' side. I think more schools could add field hockey. That would be a sport that has a lot of numbers. I think water polo is becoming a sport that people are really interested in. So you will see every once in a while the NCAA does what they call an emerging sport study. And so on the women's side, it was women's triathlon and women's sand volleyball for a long time. And those were the sports that you saw starting to emerge on college campuses. Before that, it was women's lacrosse. And so we literally saw the number of lacrosse teams double in the United States across institutions of higher learning. And of course, when that happens, that trickle down effect happens with youth sports, in that you need the youth level athletes to fill college rosters. And so we saw an emergence of women's lacrosse was a big one just like in the last decade. And then now it's like women's triathlon, women's sand volleyball, water polo, again, like I said, is becoming a big one. Bowling became a big one. That was an emerging sport a few years back. So those are the kind of sports that would add numbers, because the rosters have to be bigger for sports like that. So I think if high schools invested in those, that would be great. The problem with some of those, of course, are they're a little more expensive. I think crew is a really great sport too, but it's pretty expensive. That's a pretty spendy sport. And it requires a lot of storage in terms of your boats and whatnot. But rugby, not necessarily as expensive, and has big rosters. So that would be another good sport to add. I do think the popularity of wrestling and football is growing on the girls' side. But I also think there are sports currently that girls play that women at the college level have played that could teach and coach the sports at the youth levels that would help those sports grow maybe a little bit quicker than the sports that aren't as popular at the college level yet for women. So those are ways that we would raise that number up to 50%. And we have to get it at the youth level, so those girls see those sports early, they get interested early, attracted to them early, and want to participate in them, and then continue to develop them as they rise up into their adolescent years, their junior high year, or their middle school years, and their high school years, and then hopefully pursue it beyond that. So those were great questions that were submitted. Again, if you have questions you want to add in, great, please go ahead and do that. You can email them to me. Again, if I get a few more of them, I'll do another quick video. If I don't, then I'll just email you back with answers. But hopefully this gives some clarity to some of you. And again, great questions. I love them. If you already submitted questions and you have more, I would love it if you sent those as well. Thanks a lot.